And we've gotten you updates live from Eagle Square. We saw the president shaking all the international delegates that are present and other key stakeholders in Nigeria, talking about security chiefs, the vice president, and other key individuals within the country. Now, it's time to come back home to Lagos as we discuss some of these pertinent issues as the president is yet to give his inaugural speech. We'll be looking at the life and times of Moshood Abiola. He was an economist who had planned to use democracy as a vehicle for eliminating poverty in Nigeria, but never got a chance to. I'm now being joined by Dr. Shetolu, a public affairs analyst, as well as Jide Ologun, a legal practitioner. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. Now, before we get deeply into the life and times of Moshood Olawale Abiola, who is late now, who we are celebrating today, I would like to have your take on what your own experience was during the activities that culminated to June 12, 1993, and how you participated in all of those. Jide, please.
You know, it was a moment that gave us so much joy because at the elections, the barrier of ethnicity, religion broke down. People across the country came out to exercise their sovereignty and decided on MKO Abiola as a candidate, given his stature and his influence in the society. And of course, he also came up with a very brilliant promise of hope. And his basic intention as the leader of SDP then was to engage democracy, to banish poverty. And of course, if there is a basic responsibility of governance, which is to create prosperity and also to make the country a great place for everyone. But shockingly, that election that was adjudged the fairest, the freest, the most credible
was
in the history of
electoral
Nigeria
irregularities
was truncated. And again, we must not forget a man who played a bold role, talking about the chairman of the electoral body there, talking about Professor Humphrey Nwosu, a man who was bold enough to start announcing the result before he was taken aside and the annulment took place. And for a long time, he was silenced and kept in the cooler until he came out also to write a book. So for some of us, the fact that some of the key players in the termination of that democracy in motion, troubled by their consciences, have started speaking out, disclosing the roles they play. And the head of state then, talking about General Ibrahim Babangida, said that he took that decision because of some compelling force, some powerful elements in the society.
He said there would have been a coup d'etat.
Who gave some excuses. And I think as at that point in time, they were afraid of their political and power relevance being terminated. And that takes us completely away from national interest. And some of those powerful elements are still alive today. And the big question I am asking now, looking down the lane, years after, can we claim that we have done anything different from the poverty this man saw then and was out to deal with? And if you ask me, I think it is worse now. And one of the stanzas in our anthem is that the labor of our heroes past shall not be in vain. So if you want to exercise power over a people, it must be in moving them in the developmental direction. If you look at the Human Development Index in this country, look at the state of infrastructures, look at the state of national cohesion, look at the state, different indices that we can use. I think we still have so much.
Bamidele, we never saw MK Abiola have the opportunity to emerge as president, and then we would have done a better judgment of his character and a whole lot more. But do you think the Ekpetedo Declaration gives us an insight as to who it really stands for being a politician, for being a tycoon, a philanthropist, an icon, and what did that declaration really mean back then? Was it a step in the right direction or a mistake? Because shortly after the declaration, he was arrested.
Before I respond to that, I'd like to share my experience. Yes, at the elections.
Did you vote?
I didn't vote, but I was an election observer in Port Harcourt, in Rivers State. I teach in the university. I was a journalist at that point in time for a newspaper, a national newspaper. I'm a member of the civil society organizations. You know, I'm into activism and labor movement, and I've been in the struggle for more than 2 decades. You know, my experience, you know, I was in Port Harcourt and I visited some of the contiguous towns in Port Harcourt. The excitement was quite high, and the turnout was quite impressive. Short to say, tumultuous. It's signposted an election that was intensely contested.
It was a clear win,
yes.
over 8 million votes for MK Abiola.
It was intensely contested, and the level of participation was quite impressive. It was a watershed, and still a watershed in Nigeria's political history. In terms of the Ekwetedo declaration, we need to provide context, you know, to our discussion. You know, you recall that we had prolonged military rule. We also had a long transition, particularly under the Babangida regime, General Babangida regime. And to the extent that it was described by some scholars as, or political science, as endless transition. You know, the Nigerian people and the international community became restless, you know, and came to distrust, you know, the military leadership in terms of the transition program. There were doubts about it, the genuine intentions to transit to democratic rule. You know, there were forms of experiments, and there were indications that the military was not quite committed to entrenching democratic rule. But nonetheless, you know, we had the elections.
But Nigeria was ready for a democracy, wouldn't you say?
Nigeria was, but the military class wasn't. The military class wasn't. But nonetheless, we had elections on June 12, 1993. You know, MK Abiola emerged, you know, on a joint ticket, and it was annulled. You know, though there are also equally debates about who annulled June 12. You know, and that's located within the context of power relations. They're power blocks. You know, we had a military president who had immense powers. And there's a question about, do they have such powers to unilaterally annul election? You know, and this other argument about the military class, or a fraction of the military class, in connivance with the armed forces, the defunct Armed Forces Revolutionary Council. You know, but nonetheless, it is obvious that certain and specific political, you know, and economic interests would have been hurt with the sustenance of June 12. And it was equally obvious that the annulment, you know, was imposed by certain power blocks in Nigeria. We cannot deny power blocks and, you know, an interest in politics and political struggles and contestations. You know, given those backgrounds, you know, given the backgrounds of the doubts and the prevarications, you know, on the transition program, which culminated in the elections, you know, there were grounds to protest, you know, what could turn out to be what could turn out to be backlash, you know, or indecent outcome of the elections, and it happened that the elections were annulled, and you know, the symbols, you know, of the struggle, you know, were actually challenged by the civil society organizations, you know, and the intellectual community, I must mention it, to insist on the mandate, because we must provide the background. MK Abiola, you know, was into bourgeois politics, was a liberal businessman. He was friend of the military class. He had economic and business relationships and so on and so forth. You know, it was not impossible that he could negotiate. But they were also precious, because we must situate it within context. They were equally precious, because at the point the elections were annulled, you know, pre-Ekwededo declaration, you know, I mean, civil society groups made the point that it was a Nigerian mandate. And it was beyond MKO Abiola and Babagana Kingibe. It was beyond the defunct Social Democratic Party. And we chose to own the mandate and struggle for the mandate and insist on the mandate and insist that the mandate, you know, should be actualized.
Okay. Now, Jide, Bamidele has spoken on the role of activism. We look at the role of Nadeko. We look at the role of Kudirat Abiola. We look at journalists that died, Tunde Oladipo, Dele Giwa and the likes. We look at the role of Chima Obani and much more. These individuals, yes, MK Abiola was the face, but there were other people who were working behind, activists in their own right and trying to push the cause of democracy. But before we come back to that talk, we just have a quick clip going back into the speech MK Abiola gave in 1993.
You see, the most brilliant doctor in Norway might not have seen malaria in his life. So bringing him here and imposing him as a medical director is like sending everybody to the grave. You see, I think all that nonsense will stop. I rely on Nigerians to keep Nigeria running efficiently. And that's what it is. You see, there will be a few foreigners who will be recommended by our people, not those who will be imposed by some foreign authorities over us. We are an independent republic under God, or aren't we?
And that was late Chief MKO Abiola speaking there. And he says Nigeria is an independent body, recognizing what we stand to. We have international bodies now, organizations, delegates, everyone is watching Nigeria now. What do we make of this history-making moment today? Everyone is waiting for the president's speech. But what does that message from Abiola raise? What sort of sentiment does it raise in your mind today?
You know, it's prompted the concept of believing in the capacity of Nigerians to manage Nigeria. After all, in 1960, we opted for a political independence, and we are expected by now to have been able to position ourselves on the side of prosperity. But as a politician too, I probably should feel he spoke too much there. Because whether you like it or not, in the global politics, countries have interest in countries. You know, sometimes you call it imposition. You look at countries like Venezuela, you look at some African countries with heavy deposit of diamond, different things, and foreign powers are interested. And you know, one of the things he was also pushing was that Africans should be compensated for what they suffered in the days of slave trade. So I think for present politicians, sometimes, like we were taught in law school, you should keep your gunpowder dry. And now, coming back to the essence of governance, and I appreciate what we have mentioned here about many others who paid the costly price for this movement. The June 12 is a movement. It's just like going to South Africa and having Nelson Mandela as the face of the crusade and the fight to deliver South Africa from apartheid. Many others gave their lives for it. There were many casualties. And the fact now is that what prompted that movement is still with us now, maybe in a worse dimension. So how we want to say, beyond recognizing this day that we expressed our mandate and sovereignty under Section 14 of the Nigerian Constitution 1999 as amended, because we had to give power to the government, and we gave this power to a candidate we trusted, and that power was taken away. I think we should also go back to what that power should have delivered to us. So, for example, I would have been appeased so much if today Nigeria is the third richest country in the world in terms of deliverables. Our healthcare system is so awesome that foreign presidents come to treat themselves in Nigeria. We have an educational sector that is second to none in the world. We have engaged our mineral resources. We have about 17 refineries now. Our unemployment rate is about 2.8%.
The reverse is the case.
So the reverse is the case. So if MKO Abiola resurrects today, will he clap for Nigeria? And those who annulled the result, what have they been able to achieve with that exercise? So you see, Kagame, the president of Rwanda, was advising Nigeria recently on corruption. That it's good to fight corruption, but you don't abandon every other thing. And it doesn't take a lifetime to fight corruption. There are some elements that go into fighting corruption. You talk about effectiveness, you talk about responsibility, you talk about accountability and some other elements. Do we have them in our country? Can we claim to have moved beyond where we were in 1993? And I think, like the Chinese wisely, counseled, that the best time to have planted a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is now. So as we are celebrating colorfully June 12th as Democracy Day, we need to go back and find out, what does democracy represent? It is the government of the people, by the people and for the people, and to enhance the fortunes of the people. So if in the next 4 years, as we celebrate June 12th, we are talking about, commendable infrastructure, prosperity in the land, joy for the people, diminished crime, and positive indications, I would think that we now can justify, even though we cannot bring back the life of the likes of MKO and those who pay the costly price, the fact that the labors of our heroes would not have been in vain. And that is a huge assignment for this president.
Now, Bamile, how do we now define the role of activism? Yes, we'll still bring you other updates coming from Abuja, but as the conversation continues, how do we now today define the role of activism? And then also having leaders that talk to the people, that speak from their heart, that can connect with the people, because that was one of the elements that MKO Abiola had. He just had a way of connecting with the people. Do you think in Nigeria today would be able to have a leader that seems to unify the people? The president still stands his ground and says that he's going to be a father for all, but moving forward now, do you think we have people that represent the interest of Nigerians as a whole? And how then do we now begin to appreciate the role of activism and not necessarily see it as enmity?
Well, please, I'd like to make one or two clarifications. One, before I respond. One, I'd like to make the point that the civil society organizations, which I was part of, and the left organizations in Nigeria did not participate in the Babangida transition. We were not part of it. We criticized it. We exposed the flaws and the contradictions within the transition.
But there are so many names within the camp of
just a minute. We
Abiola, who later turned around.
Just a minute. We did not, that's not the point I'm making. We did not participate in the transition. You recall that the political parties were imposed. The political parties did not emerge. It did not evolve. And parties historically and globally evolve. There were contradictions in the process. And there were doubts about the genuineness and the workability of the elections. But nonetheless, the elections held, and also was a bourgeois election, and which produced MKO Abiola and Kingibe joint ticket. We chose to support...
Well, just to cut you there, the parade is still going on there at the Eagle Square. Quite a colorful spectacle going on over there. Everyone is still waiting with bated breath for the president's speech. He hasn't spoken since inauguration, which was a low-key event, and today marks a much more significant day. And we hope that any time from now, after the parade, the president will speak. But continuing, Bamile.
The point I'm making is this, that we weren't part of the transition, but the elections held, and we felt that on principle, civil society organizations would insist that the mandate should be actualized, despite its contradictions. Okay? The second point I'd like to make is we should appreciate the Babangida transition within the context of twin programs. There was the economic component of it, which was a structural adjustment program, and there was a political component, which was a political transition program that culminated in the June 12 elections. The SAP agenda, was foreign defined. And that was the origin of economic liberalization and deregulation, which eviscerated and impoverished the Nigerian people. And to that extent, social movements, including labor and intellectuals and student organizations, build popular movements, to win struggles against the authoritarianism, economic authoritarianism, and political utility, political dominating tendency of the Babangida administration. So the activists, a group you are referring to, the social movements we're trying to describe, emerged within that context, though it predated it, but it became popular.
Much more active.
It became
aggressive.
It became popular and stronger within the context of the contradictions that were imposed by the Babangida transition. Okay, but so along the line, the social movement, became convoluted again with its own internal contradictions, and we lost the movement aspect of it. Okay, and we were losing the ideology because neoliberalism was gaining ascendancy. Okay, and the military was also decimating the left organizations and also penetrating the left organizations and some of the popular organizations under the student movement and so on and so forth. But in terms of the contemporariness you're referring to now, do we have the leadership, that will unify and so on and so forth? I'd like to make the point that, the prospect of a unifying leadership is still dim to the extent of some factors I'd like to identify. One, Nigeria has not been able to resolve the national question. And there's still,
Are you
preferences.
referring to restructuring as the national question?
Well, restructuring, federalism, or rethinking of federalism, etc. But as a political scientist that I am, I rather call it the national question, which is more encompassing. Okay? Most of the sectors in Nigeria still ascribe to ethnic and religious and regional, considerations. The identity crisis in Nigeria has not been resolved. And to that extent, politics and political struggle and who guess what is still ethnicized, in Nigeria and highly politicized.
Well, we had over 128 invitations sent out there to both international and then African delegate heads of state and government to participate in today's celebration. It's still the Democracy Day special, the maiden edition. But quickly now, Jide, one of the issues that we had during the life and times of MKO Abiola is the fact that there was too much power at the center. And you rightly mentioned that why would the military even have so much power to call for an annulment with the excuse of irregularity, which did not necessarily hold any ground. Now, how then do we address the situation of having too much power at the center? Unbundling. So many have called for restructuring in Nigeria. The definition might change from people to people, but MK Abiola stood and said there is no reason why any Nigerian should go to sleep hungry. People are hungry, people are dying, people are not necessarily happy. What do you think the president, if it does not even necessarily accept the entirety of restructuring, what steps do you expect him to take differently now to show that he hears the call of the people, whether opposition or not?
I'll take the advantage of the fact that we have global leaders congregating in our country now to witness this beautiful occasion. And of course, you can see how colorful it's been. And that shows us we have the capacity to mobilize and be effective. Like they say, where there is a will, there is a way. So I will want us to operate the kind of leadership that looks away from the local mentality to the global mentality. And right now, the United Nations came up with the Sustainable Development Goals that will be evaluated by year 2030. We're talking about zero tolerance for hunger, zero tolerance for poverty, decent jobs, decent society, health care, things that will make us operate in a decent society. And the government has identified this even in the last 4.5 years of the existence of this regime in 3 capsules, which is security of the people, the economy, and fight against corruption. Because when political promises are not fulfilled, that is the highest level of corruption. So I want the president to look at the goodwill he has enjoyed from the people of Nigeria. We argue that we should all be on board. I think we are all on board. For example, if I'm traveling by air to the US, my part is to pay for the ticket, I have my visa, I come on board. And the pilot is to fly that aircraft to
safely.
Destination. But we are all in the same aircraft, and we jointly pray for safety. So as the electorate, we have come out, eligible voters, those who could vote, we have come out to elect. We have a representative
and that's
democracy.
President Muhammadu Buhari seated there right next to Vice President Yemi Osinbajo, still enjoying the activities in commemoration of the day. It's quite still a beautiful spectacle. You have dancers there. But sorry for having caught you there. You were saying.
So can you now play your own part? Even as this celebration is going on, the Chief of Army Staff is there, the Chief of Naval Staff is there, the Chief of Air Staff is there, the Inspector General of Police is there. We have the Minister of Defense that we coordinate their collaborations to ensure that we have security. As we speak, we have enormous resources in the country. We have the ministries. In fact, the Ministry of Petroleum, because oil and gas happens to be our romantic resource in Nigeria. The president himself is the substantive minister in charge of this. So why can't we engage these resources? And also, we are talking about, if you look at Section 15 of the Nigerian Constitution as amended, it talks about national integration. How can we integrate? How can you make the southerner to trust the northerner to trust the south? Right now we are polarized. So we need to bring all this together and not be afraid to see any part of the country developed. I am disturbed when I see elders and governors from one region moving to Aso Villa, which is the seat of power, to beg for development. I mean, it's out of reasoning, because I have never heard that Texans go to Washington, D.C. to beg Donald Trump for development. And that brings us to this concept of restructuring. If we now think that we may not trust one another, then can we empower each region in terms of resources? Can we, and the legislatures, they have a lot to do. Can we look at the exclusive legislative list, deal with mining of the resources you have in your state, for instance? Give the license, let states handle whatever they have within their region to develop. You see, so we need to create prosperity. We need to, facilitate security. We need to bring people to love one another and enjoy the benefits in this land.
For the lack of time now, we look at the arrest of MKO Abiola. We look at how he died, and he never got to enjoy the successes that comes with really emerging as winner of the election. But now, what electoral reforms do you expect the 9th National Assembly to take up? Because we remember the president denied assent to some of the bills that had already passed, and just because the timing was too close to our election. That's one hand. And then what do you expect this time around to immortalize? What legislation do you expect we used to immortalize further MKO Abiola, acknowledge the role of Kudirat Abiola, as well as the role of Nadeko and other journalists and other individuals? Chima Albani, what happens to Imo State? There should be something done today to recognize him.
Well, I'd like to react rather haphazardly without being methodical, to your questions. I am not quite comfortable, with due respect, with the overemphasis on Nadeko. And I need to make clarifications for posterity. Because I was in the struggle. As young as I am, I'm in the struggle. I was in the struggle. When June 12 was annulled, the most critical group that joined MKO Abiola, King Gibe, and the struggle were the civil society organizations, not NADECO. Okay? And the Chima Urbanis you mentioned, Bamidele Aturu,
Tunde Oladipo,
Femi Falana, Gani Fawemi, Femi Aborishade, and the rest of them played greater and more critical role in the struggle than the NADECO. NADECO came into the struggle much later. And it would be ahistorical, with due respect for NADECO or ethnic-based organizations such as Afenifere, to appropriate, and own the June 12 struggle.
What do you now say about
civil society and radical groups actually, played greater and more historic and more fundamental role in the struggle. Kudirat Abiola was a symbol of the struggle. There's no doubt.
So what do we do today to utilize that?
I might not have immediate response in terms of whatever, but the bottom line is, a role, same with other heroines, in the struggle for June 12, it should be, it should not be eclipsed. And there should be deliberate and concrete attempts by the state to pursue deliberate state measures, to sustain, their contributions in the annals of Nigeria's history.
Bamidele Sheteolu, public affairs analyst. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and Jide Ologun, legal practitioner as well. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your contribution, and hopefully today, whatever speech the president is giving, he touches on all of these pertinent issues that we've raised. We'd like to see much more immortalization of MKO Abiola and everyone who joined in the struggle. Today is Democracy Day, really.
Thank you.
And we'll take a quick break now for the news update. When we return, we'll be talking about how democracy has elevated the lives of Nigerians. Stay with us on Plus TV Africa. We have plenty more updates.